Good evening and welcome back to Games Night. I'm Mike Reddy, standing in for Vale and Blakemore, who are both off fighting crime. Don't forget to add the Games Night gamer tag to your friends list, or Paul Vale's mild-mannered alter ego will start to wither from lack of attention. Well, we reviewed one of the most recently successful movie license tie-ins, Lego Indie, but games from movies are often nearly as bad as movies from games. Why do developers make bad games? Why do publishers release them? And why do the critics tear them apart like the rabid lot they are? What can be done to stem the tide of mediocrity? Well, we've had a host of theories from the XLeague forums over at XLeague.tv, from viewers wanting to make their voices heard on this and other topics. Jim, as a developer for Rare, it will be incredibly unfair of me to ask you why developers make bad games. So, why do developers make bad games?
Obviously, I'm really well qualified to speak about this, particularly because of movie tie-ins, which have traditionally been really bad for Rare. I mean, particularly GoldenEye, which was a turkey.
Oh, yeah, it was awful.
I think we can all accept that.
That's the worst output in the industry.
Absolutely.
I think if you want to look at why titles can go wrong, you've got to know a little bit about the development process. And really, a game rests in two main areas. You've got the design. You've got to have a certain integrity of design. It's got to be followed through, and it can't be swayed from its original path. The next thing is the whole production phase. I don't want to go into details about the production phase, but it boils down to a lot of software risks, a lot of art risks, and the rest of it. Something going wrong in any of these stages can floor a game quite horribly. But I think generally the worst thing is to skimp on design. I think if you don't have a strong concept behind a game, it doesn't, however well you polish it, you can't polish it.
Okay, well, look, a lot of the people on the XLeague forums actually were of the opinion, pretty cynical lot, they were of the opinion that it was pretty much money. So if I kind of handed you a huge wad of cash, do you not think that that would affect your decision to make a game?
In terms, I mean, if you think that you could give me a bunch of money because it would then be in my interest to make a turkey of a game, I think you'd be mistaken. Something to bear in mind is that there are a lot of different parties involved in making a title. You've got publishers, you've got the developers, you've got the license holders, and they've all got different stakes, and they're all going to exert different pressures. I can imagine that, I mean, it's a nice situation being in Microsoft where it's all joined up, but if you're an external developer, I'm sure that it can be, these pressures can come together in rather a nasty way.
Rare has a kind of umbrella though. I mean, it's allowed to have the time to develop games. If you could give advice to some of the people who are kind of a bit more hand to mouth and having to maybe chase with tenders on movie titles, what would you tell them?
I'd tell them that they've got to plan. You can't go into these things blind. You make sure that you're making best use of things like middleware. Make sure that that your design is unshakable and is written not exactly in stone. Make sure that your timetable is a feasible one and that you've assessed all the technology risks ahead of time.
Okay, I wish I come and tell my students that. Ellie, on the forum I asked a lot of people what they would do to try and avoid making bad games. If you could wave the magic wand, what would you do to avoid bad games?
I don't know, I'm not a developer, but I would imagine probably have about 50 years and £100 million to finish it.
So
I
infinite
suppose.
Time and infinite resources.
Yeah, that would probably do it, just about.
We'd all end up crashing.
Well, the thing is, you see so many examples of games which have had a huge budget and ended up to be just pants regardless. So, I mean, I'm not convinced that it's as much of a money issue as people might believe. I think certainly time is a bigger issue than money, just running out of time, and the game needs to ship when it needs to ship. In most cases, it's very rare that a developer can sort of convince the publisher, I think, to sort of just get more free time, and it's just always a massive blessing when they do get more free time, and it's nice to see that when games do, that they turn it around. But yeah, I mean, I think it's just about really, as you said, the key word is planning, isn't it? Is sticking to a schedule.
I think as well we should be careful here not to confuse developers with publishers and the different roles they play.
Right.
And people say, and I've said on this programme, developers don't ever set out to make a bad game. And it's often publishers who kind of force the game out. But that said,
some of it's the design of it as well and stuff.
Yeah. But that's we're trying a new feature out on Eurogamer at the moment called the Shame Train, where I've actually been tasked with reviewing the games so bad that publishers wouldn't send us free copies in the hope that we wouldn't review them at all. So we've actually gone out and bought these games, and good grief, I simply cannot believe that some of these games, the people making them didn't kind of just take the money and you know, build some graphics out of CFAX and run away, basically.
Now, Examiner Jim, you mentioned earlier when we were talking off camera about the kind of process of game classification. Can you just remind us what the first stage is when games come into you?
Well, the very first stage is for our IT department to make sure it actually works, because there's no point scheduling a couple of examiners to play a game and then them to just get stuck because it's buggy or...
Right. So in the UK, obviously, they have to have game classification of some kind. So they have to get through this, it works. But do you ever kind of like, I mean, if you can say this, do you ever kind of shake your head when you look at a game and you have to classify it?
In terms of how bad the game is?
Yeah.
Oh, all the time, yeah. But I mean, that happens with films and video as well. I mean,
any names or
I couldn't possibly comment. But no, I mean, I classify films and videos as well, and the number of really awful films we see that have clearly had a lot of effort put into them, and a lot of money and time, and, you know, in some cases hundreds of people have worked on them, and no one has pointed out how incredibly bad they are. And it's just the nature of any medium, I think. In games tend to be something that you see all of the games that are out there, because there's not that many games compared to books, compared to films and videos and stuff. You know, all of them get a bit of the spotlight sometimes, and you see in these games and you think, well, that's not very good. But there's a million really books. I can't say that, sorry.
No, not really.
I'm going to have to censor that one.
Okay, hang on a second. So, the thing is, though, you made the analogy to films and books, but actually there is a whole genre of B-movies, of films that are so bad they come back round to good. Why is it that we don't have, Jim, why is it we don't have kind of B games?
Well, we do. We have games that weren't appreciated at the time and became classics later on.
But they had a vein of goodness. I mean, why don't we have the kind of Plan B from outer space version of a game? Do you think? Why have such a threshold of what is good and what is bad?
Probably because the games industry is in this odd time when it's a bit of a bloodbath and everything is a really high-risk project. A games project is a very expensive thing to undertake, in the main. I mean, I know there are things like flash games and so on that are lower risk, and nobody really cares if one of those is a little bit, you know, below par. So use your terms. But the simple fact is that if you're going to plunge, I don't know, $50 or $100 million into a project, you're not going to make it a B-movie project. It's, you're going to take a risk, and risks either pay off or don't pay off. Sometimes, I mean, does it sometimes even really matter whether it's a good game or a bad game? Sometimes it just won't get the sales because it won't get the attention. It wasn't marketed correctly, so it wasn't appreciated for what it was.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to have to cut you off there. And if the next game is anything to go by, it will be wearing a strange mask and wielding a huge katana. That's right. Next for review is the continuation of the legendary series by Itagaki-san and Team Ninja. Ninja Gaiden, itself a reimagining of the NES and SNES originals, has had several makeovers with Black, Sigma and Dragon Sword, but now it's the turn of Ninja Gaiden 2. Franchise-owning Death Sword sequel or obliteration technique? Let's find out.
So, let me get this straight.
Let me see here.
You don't have a clue where I can find Ryu Hayabusa?
No one knows where a ninja goes. If he isn't at the Hayabusa village, he could be halfway around the world. Sonia, was it? Do you have business with Ryu?
I do.
And what might that be?
All I'll say is that it concerns the Archfiend.
Rare Jim, I know you have a link to the publishers Microsoft, obviously, but what's your personal opinion of this game?
Well, I think that this game essentially is not in a bad way, is a one-trick pony. What it's trying to deliver is some kind of whirling ballet of death and combat as an art form. And to be honest, I think it generally does that really well. You can see the various trade-offs that have been made, that a lot of the attention is really going on the characters and the animation, so they tend to look really spiffy, while the backgrounds tend to kind of suffer a little bit and tend to look a little bit more bland, but then that's not what you're supposed to be looking at. Personally, I found it a little bit hard. I admittedly got stuck quite early on with one of the bosses, and it was a similar problem to what I had in the first game. But on the bright side, in the first game, I used to really complain because it took me 20 minutes to get back to the point to face that boss, whereas at least they've made the intelligent decision of putting save points in at useful times. Yeah,
I wish they'd done that in Kingdom Hearts. Dory, has Itagaki made this, quotes, and his quotes, the world's premier action game?
Pretty much. He's certainly come close to it, I think. I mean, here's the thing. I mean, I think Ninja Gaiden 1 on the original Xbox, for me, was pretty much the best game of the last generation. I mean, it was that good. It was simply incredible. And he's actually managed to improve on it in a few areas with number 2. There's very little that I had a problem with in Ninja Gaiden 2. Okay. I mean, it is incredibly difficult, unlike this guy who's only got onto the second level.
A gaming win.
So on screen right now, we've had one of the cutscenes. Do you think it tells the story effectively?
No, absolutely not. That's one thing that Ninja Gaiden wasn't trying to do, and certainly isn't doing now. It is tell us a story. The story is a joke, to be honest. The story is nonsense.
I hate it when you sit on the fence as well.
Well, but that's really that, and some of the issues with the difficulty, not the difficulty in general. I mean, I've finished the game on Warrior, which is fairly difficult. Although there are 2 harder modes beyond that, which to do those requires a level of skill that's just unimaginable.
I think you're a bit of a Ninja Gaiden fanboy, aren't you?
Well, I'm certainly a big fan of this as a sequel. If I can say one other negative about it, though, I mean, because I could go on with positives all day about it, is I don't think
it's not like we've got a limited time.
Well, no, but one thing about it is I don't think it has the atmosphere of the original, which is interesting. And I think a lot of the atmosphere in number 1 came from the music. In fact, the music was incredible in number 1. There's some really memorable sort of tunes.
This is the Xbox number 1 now, not the SNES.
Xbox One number 1. Yeah, sorry, yeah, and yeah, I don't think the music's up to that standard in number 2.
Okay, well, it's a bit of a controversial game. Examiner Jim, lots of blood and guts spurting across the screen, but did it cut the mustard for you?
Well, there is a lot of blood and guts. That's why it's an 18. And there's a lot of decapitations and limbs flying off all the place. It is the only thing it does. I think it does it really, really well, and it's great fun to pick up and play. If it was a bit easier, it might be a bit more fun to pick up and play just for a bit and then put down again. Yeah. Whereas you've got that kind of, just one more go and I might beat this guy. That's maybe a good thing too, but it depends what other stuff you have to do, really.
Well, interestingly, you did actually censor number 1. There were no decapitations in number 1, whereas number 2 is all about dismemberment of limbs. We
didn't actually classify number 1. That was
really?
done by Peggy.
Oh, right, no, that's okay. Correct, right.
There is a threshold, we'll come back to that later. Sure. Ellie, will many people see this game through to the bitter end, do you think?
I certainly won't, DoctorMike. I can't be bothered. It's too hard, which is a boring thing to say, but it is the truth. I'm sure lots of people like Adam, who are good at games, will love it and will enjoy it. There's lots to enjoy in this game. It looks beautiful and the combat is fantastic if you can understand it, and it's great and absolutely. But I think for the majority of I suppose mainstream gamers, I don't know what we're calling them now, women and old people, they won't like it.
The hardcore.
The hardcore, I think, yeah.
I love the term softcore gamer, which has come into use. It has strange connotations. Okay then, so come on, we'll start with you, Dory, again, because I just know your score's going to be a high one.
Well, of course it is. One thing I would say, you've got to turn manual saves on, otherwise you run the risk of getting stuck at a point perhaps very late in the game, and leaving yourself with too few power-ups and stuff to literally progress and thus ruining the game. That's the default setting of auto, so you've got to switch manual on. So that's the most important thing to note about it if you're gonna buy it. Anyway, apart from that, there's really not much to moan about here. The core action is
come on, give me your score.
Well, I've just got to, the main thing here is the gameplay, right? And I think it's one of the finest examples of action gameplay ever. So 9.
9? After all that, a 9? I thought it was going to be 10.5. I
was going to toy with a 1 there. But
Rare Jim.
Yeah, I mean, it's not a game for me. It's a little bit too hard for me. I'm one of these soft-core chaps, apparently. But I think my main gripe with it, although I think it delivers very well at what it does, and I can see the quality, even if I can't quite appreciate it, the main problem for me is that it's not so much that it's difficult. It's not consistently difficult. It doesn't. You go through swathes and swathes of these feckless ninjas, and suddenly you're confronted with a guy made of steel, and it just feels a little bit unfair. And yeah, so I mean, although I think it's great, I'm going to give it an 8 rather than the higher scores.
I think the phrase "feckless ninja" is going to stay in my head forever.
I'm going to be hunted down now
by ninjas. Ellie.
I get that it's a great game in the combat genre, and there's lots of stuff right with it. I think there's also some serious flaws. I think the camera is pretty poor, and I do think it's too hard, and so I'm going to give it a 6.
Okay, and finally, Examiner Jim.
Well, as I say, what it does really well. It is a bit too hard, so that's why I'm giving it an 8 as well.
Okay, 8. That's it for this part, but don't go away as we've got the hottest debate in game classification coming up after the break. See you in 3.